Well, hello, folks. Tara Bachland here, and with our Becoming an Herbalist series, and we may expand into some other related health and wellness realms, but in the years that I've been in the health and wellness in various ways, I came through it in such a meandering kind of way, and I see that others too don't always have a direct path or necessarily following steps 1 through 10 or whatever they may be. So today I'm here with Phyllis D. Light. We've worked together for a number of years. She's a prominent teacher and practitioner in her area, author of a couple of books as well, including Southern Folk Medicine, and fascinating comes from quite an interesting background, which is why I wanted to help share with you the many ways that you can be led into herbalism. And so thank you very much for joining us, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
So I think where I'd like to start is, I mean, tell us a bit about you. How long have you been practicing herbalism,
Uh,
and in what ways? Because I know you have multiple facets to your history.
yeah. Well, my family were wildcrafters. And so I started in the woods when I was about 10 with my family. My grandmother was a midwife and herbalist, and my dad did some herbalism in the community. So I just grew up in this very traditional modality of Southern folk medicine. It's just always been there. I guess I started technically seeing clients when I was about 21 or 22, um, kind of early on. And I'd had this long traditional training. Like I say, I started at 10. And so it was like, as Matthew Wood said, I got to take over my grandmother's practice. And that was true to some extent, but she had actually been out of the midwifery practice for many, many, many years because it had become illegal in the state of Alabama during her lifetime. But she maintained her knowledge of herbalism and passed that on, as did my grandfather, as did my father. So that was about the time I started. And it was just come in my kitchen, have a seat, what's going on, not taking appointments, knock on the door, somebody found me or had heard about me and had driven to see me, and just there they were. So it was a very, you might call it in modern terms, unprofessional practice, but it was community practice. And it was the community practice of my time period, of my grandmother's time period. You didn't have to have an appointment, you just showed up. Right. So that was my early days and my beginning. So that's how I got started.
Did everyone in your family become an herbalist, so to speak, or is there kind of a calling in a way?
Nobody else in my family became an herbalist, though most people do, move toward natural remedies instead of conventional medicine. They're all have some awareness and knowledge of that. So I, it was something deep in me that just kept leading me here to the plants, to herbalism over and over and over again. Even when I went off in other directions, it was always there part time. It never left. So for me personally, I do consider it a calling, and one that started really early with my grandparents. I mean, some of my most vivid childhood memories are going to my grandparents, and then for the day, and then after lunch, we headed out in the woods for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it was just a normal event, and then there would be the special times of the family getting together to go ginseng hunting, where there would be, like, 6 or 7 or 8 of us all in the woods at the same time, or whatever herb we might happen to be wild crafting in the moment. Generally, it was ginseng, but it might be pink root, or it might be yellow root, or it might be some other root. So, and those were more planned excursions. But if the weather was nice, uh, grandparents, we always had that walk. We always went on a walk to see what was in the woods, what was available. And some of my best treasures were found on those walks, which had nothing to do with plants. It would be like old home places that people had deserted. Finding little boxes and bottles of, where they just put their trash in a big pile outside. So it came like, it was like archaeology a little
Mhm.
bit. Let's dig through the rubbish and see what we could find. And I have some beautiful glass boxes that I found in the woods that I still have, and I've had them, I don't know, 50 years. And I don't know how they were when they got thrown away. And yeah, they have a little corner chipped, or the metal is doesn't look great on them, but these were super treasures also.
Sounds like they're good memories.
Yeah, they're really good memories.
So you said your training began at 10. So was there something in your parents, your grandparents says, yeah, it looks like she has a knack for this or an interest. We're going to formally start training her.
It was no, it was
Mhm.
more like, this is what we do. This is our family
Mhm.
business. This is what we do. This is how we do it. And so we're just going to do it. And so my sister had the same opportunity. One of my brothers did, not my youngest brother, because my grandparents had kind of left that by the time he was old enough. But I was the one that was like, I remembered every single thing.
Mhm.
And this is over and over again in my life, I come back to this is how I knew it was a calling. If they told me something about a plant, it was lodged in here forever. You know?
Mhm.
Yeah, I knew it. I could call it back up. I didn't forget it. I I knew it. I could look at the plant, I could identify it. I just knew it. And so it was like this knowing, always this knowing that continued to lead me into like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Even though, like I said, I would leave it for a while in the early days and come back, leave it and come back, or just do it a little bit part time. But yeah, it was always there.
So you said you started when you were 21, people started showing up at the door. Is just kind of word got around?
Yeah, basically that was it. Small community, word got around, and that was it. There was no advertising, no me teaching classes to get my name out there. It was just like, oh, somebody at church told somebody at church told somebody at church, and before you know it, people were knocking on the door. Or somebody saw someone at a community event and told somebody and so in my youth, there were much more community event type gatherings and opportunities for people to share by word of mouth.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You said your grandmother was no longer practicing midwifery, but did you get to sit on consultations or that sort of thing with her?
Well, when we think about my grandmother or Tommy Bass, another one of my Appalachian elder teachers, they didn't do consultations as we think about consultations today, where we have a formalized process. That wasn't it. People showed up and people said, "You the herbalist?" And Tommy or my grandmother, they would go, "Yep." And what's wrong? And the person would say, "This is what's wrong, how I'm feeling." And then it was like, okay, and that was it.
Mhm.
That was just kind of like it. People were not on medications. So you didn't have to worry about that. Nobody was on medication from the doctor for extended periods of time. Number one, they hadn't really started that yet among the poor people, and these were more impoverished people, definitely lower income. So didn't have health insurance. It wasn't a big thing yet. So, herbalism was much more the first line of defense. If you had to be desperate to go to the doctor because it was a big chunk of your paycheck to go to the doctor, and then people would go, and it didn't help me at all.
Mm.
Because the doctor is going, I need to run these tests, and people are going, well, I don't have the money for that. And there also in this time period, there were no government aid programs. no pharmaceutical aid programs, which they offer now. So it was like, this is it. You're on your own. You got some pocket money. You go to the doctor. Maybe if the doctor, you might run up a tab with a doctor, but eventually you got to pay that doctor, right? And so it was just like a different situation. And an old timey herbalist often didn't know that much about the human body the way we think of it. My grandmother never finished high school and could read, but you know, didn't do a lot of investigation. Tommy was not a big reader. And then where are you going to get the books? You have to go to the library and maybe they might have one because you sure can't afford to buy one. So it was more about understanding the patterns of dysfunction in the human body and herbs that could help that pattern of dysfunction. So it's a little bit different approach. I mean, modern herbalism, we still might talk about that, but we also include like physiology. Oh, this is how the gallbladder works. I mean, personally, this is how I teach now, because it's a different time period. People want to know how their body works. They can look it up on the internet if they want to, people are always cross-checking you. But back then there was no big forms of information and communication. So it was like, how do you learn about the body? Well, trial and error, maybe a book in the library, if the library had one, small country libraries. So it was more about patterns of dysfunction and herbs that would help. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my initial training. And then later I added on the physiology.
Which I definitely want to come back to. It sounds like you've gone full circle, and it's a nice package.
Yeah, nice combination.
Tommy Bass is known, through the herbalism community, but for those who don't know or don't know yet, can you tell us a little bit of who he was?
Well, Tommy Bass was actually very famous, nationally renowned herbalist from North Alabama, which is where I'm from, and who kind of had clients from all over the world just by mail. People would write him letters and say, hey, this is what's wrong with me. This is how I'm feeling. This is what the doctor says. And he would mail him back, well, this is a herb, blah, 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 and mail it all back to him and hope he got a check in the mail back. I mean, seriously, hope he got one back. But Tommy has had several documentaries done about him. He was front page New York Journal at one point. He just became very renowned. University of North Carolina did 2 books on him. So he had quite a following.
What do you think made him so renowned?
Well, one, he knew his herbs. 2, he was just like this super humble, sweet man who never made enough money off all this famous herbalism not to live in a shack. Right? I mean, he gave away way more than he got back. And he had this real trust that people were going to send him money or give him money. And maybe they did and maybe they didn't. But he knew his herbs. He could identify a few hundred plants in the woods, which is just phenomenal, and what to use them for. He knew how to find them, what part of the plant to use, how to traditionally process it, and he was just the package and knowledgeable about the plants. And I can't say what a sweet, humble man he was. He really was.
And you had the opportunity to study with him?
Yes, I did.
Sounds like quite a gift.
It was for a few years there before his death.
Well, I bet a few people will be looking up his documentaries now.
Yeah. And you should.
So my next question that I, think about for people, maybe it happens too when you grow up around it. Was there a point, or was it just by osmosis you just knew? Was there a point that you made the connection like herbs, oh, they have a healing or a health promoting potential, or was that just a given?
It was just a given. It was just totally a given. And as I have come to realize a real gift, because I didn't even get my first herb book until I was 36, maybe 40,
Wow.
um, before I had an herb book, because everything had been traditional knowledge of all the plants, which is why I think I have often stated uses of plants that are maybe not in books.
Mm,
Because it was orally passed on tradition based on herbalist experience and observation. So it was like really super practical, clinical. This is what I've seen it do. This is what I've observed. This is what I've been taught. So this is what I'm passing on. And so, like I say, that was pretty much that old before I had my first herb book or realized there was herbalism outside of Alabama.
mm. Wow.
Yeah. They were like herbalist in other parts of the country, huh? Uh, yeah.
What would
And
you
so,
say are sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking I was probably 41 or 42 before I went to work at Clayton College that needed an herbalist, and about that age when I met Matthew Wood. And then he introduced me to the wider herbal world community out there.
Wow, and they got introduced to you too, sounds like.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, you've gone through a number of steps as far as your education from what it sounds like. You learned from your family, trained with Tommy Bass, had your own, clinical experience, just kinda flowed right into it. What would you say were the other educational steps along the way?
Well, almost everything I did is a job because because herbalism did not put a lot of food on my table or feed my kids.
Mm,
It was that kind of time period in the South. I'm sure people in other parts of the country are making a living from herbalism, but I wasn't. If somebody came to see me, maybe they gave me money, maybe didn't. I was still following Tommy Bass's pattern.
mm,
And Tommy always had a side job to make money to buy things with. His side job was repairing small appliances, right? He was really good on lawnmowers, refrigerators, stoves, that sort of thing. So I always had to have a side job. And so I picked side jobs that, number one, paid enough money to help pay the bills, but also kind of furthered my knowledge about how the body worked. So I taught gymnastics for a number of years, taught dance, like little jazz dance. I taught um, uh, the Olympic syllabus gymnastics. So I took people to competitions. Was the what do you call trainer on the basketball team at a local college for 2 years, so I learned how to take people up from the other trainer. Um, I taught yoga for 10 years. I taught aerobics for 20 years. These were all side gigs, to the herbalism, but they brought in a steady stream of money. I taught weight room. Um, in bodybuilding, took students to competitions and dance and aerobics. It taught me the physicality of the body, how the muscles, tendons, spine, how everything is put together. Really how to treat is the wrong word, but use that in the trainer world. Um, Aches, sprains, anything, any kind of injury related to sports or overwork. So that was a big chunk, and that understanding that led me into ergonomics. And so for a time I did and studied ergonomics, and I would go in and set up workstations for people and
Mhm.
companies. So that, was like, oh, furthering kind of like my knowledge of the body. I worked my way through college as a single parent with 2 kids, working 3 part-time jobs, and to get a degree. And so I worked my way through college in the PE department at the university as PE staff. Um, again, PE department also housed the health department. So I was teaching health courses as I was working on both my bachelor's, and then later I did the same thing a few years later when I worked on my master's. So I ended up getting a master's in nutrition and healthcare under the health studies department. So, every single thing I did as a side job or educationally only helped me know more about the body, how the body worked, and then I could utilize that with the herbalism.
And you did eventually make herbalism your full-time gig in a couple,
Yes,
what
I
now?
yes, I did.
Yeah.
Along with nutrition, because they go in hand. And so my herbal sessions always include, let's talk about what did you eat? What foods? Tell me about what you eat. Nutrition was a big area of study for me. But yes, it became pretty much full time. I did do massage therapy for a while, got my massage therapy license, and I would kind of split my day of consultations with 3 or 4. Oh, and now these are formal consultations, right? Where I'm actually charging money and making a living and not doing all these side gigs. And so I could do like 2, 3, 4 herbal consultations, and then I could do a body work.
Mhm.
And it would kind of break my day up and help me move,
Mhm.
and plus, I was in shiatsu was my put the old elbow out there, was my preferred mode, and pressure point therapy. So, and again, that is understanding the electrical systems of the body and how the body is put together if you're doing shiatsu and pressure point therapy and acupressure, which is what I did. So, I always feel like it all came together. It was all helping everything I did kind of supported the holistic approach to the body.
Well, I'd imagine, people come in for massage, they're more familiar with what massage is sometimes, and then they, learn about herbalism. And then at the same time, you hear about people who do only massage as a profession and it just wears their body down. And so you're
Yes,
getting a nice balance.
yes, and that's what I was looking for. And then herbal consultations, you're just sitting, sitting, sitting. So I wanted to balance and break this up for my body.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
And then later also you worked on vast curriculum, correct? For Clayton College.
Yes, I was director of herbal studies at Clayton College and developed, back in the late 1999, I developed the 3-tiered program that everybody uses now: family herbalist, community herbalist, you know, herbal practitioner or master herbalist, whatever, or clinical herbalist, whatever you want to call that third tier. Yeah, that got put out there at Clayton College back in 1999, and now it's all over. All or almost all herbal programs use that.
I heard you came up with that terminology too that
Yes.
everybody uses these days.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did at Clayton College, yeah. We were
Yeah.
we were leading the way.
So for people who may not familiar, maybe they're really new to herbalism, what is the difference in those levels? How would you describe those levels?
Well, the family herbalist is kind of like your foundation, your basic introduction to herbal medicine making, how to make tinctures. Depending on the program you're in, there may be some plant identification, there may not. Um, because each region of the world and country and this country have different plants. So sometimes that's included, sometimes it isn't. But, basic foundation on getting herbs, how to store them, how to turn them into tinctures and salves and teas and decoctions, you know, that's basic. And then home remedies from that, how to use the herbs for just common ailments that would be in any family, like cough, cold, flu, baby teething, upset tummy, all of these different, I think, things that families go through. And then also included would be um, from infancy through adulthood to elderhood, because at each stage of our life, our inherent herbal, or no, let me rephrase that. Our inherent needs, our physical needs kind of change. And so, also, what do you do during pregnancy? What do you do for things like PMS and or any kind of menstrual difficulties, stages of life kind of issues would be included in the family herbalist. And then what do we need as we get older? How do we keep our immune system healthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's included in the family herbalist approach. So that's kind of the basics of the family herbalist. There might be a little nutrition thrown in, just how to eat healthy. But in the community herbalist, it's like, let's notch this information up a bit, and let's improve nutrition awareness. What are the nutrients and how does our body use them, and what happens if we don't have the nutrients? Let's notch it up herbally and start talking about patterns of dysfunction that you might find with, let's say, arthritis or an autoimmune disease. Let's dig deeper. And also how to outreach into your community. Because if you're outreaching into your community and they're coming to see you, they're going to be coming like, I've got high blood pressure, I've got diabetes, so there are these common disorders, chronic disorders in the public that people seek information for. That is part of community herbalism. And then the herbal practitioner notches that information level and approach up a little bit more. And we start combining uh, plant, we start combining the use of herbs and plants with nutrition and really digging deep into the patterns of dysfunction. When did they start? How long has this been going on? Et cetera, et cetera. So each level kind of notches up the information, but it all starts with this basic foundational information you find in the family herbalist.
Can you imagine if every family had one person, that they could call up and was, quote, the family herbalist? I mean, how different our
How,
society would be.
oh yeah, wouldn't that be awesome?
It would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the way it used to be, you know?
Yeah.
Like in my grandmother's day, that is the way it was. And so this was the person you can depend on.
Mhm.
Even if there was family drama going on, which there's always family drama, this is the
Mhm.
person who's going to be unbiased about your health situation and help you.
Mhm.
So yeah, it would be awesome to have that.
I remember, my grandma, who thankfully is still alive, but she'd be like, "Oh, you're having cramps? Take an Epsom salt bath, or eat this food," and be like, "Grandma, it's such weird food. Why are you recommending, this?" And years later, I'm like, "Oh, that's why."
Yeah, and she might not have even known why. Because that time period, it's just information had been passed on.
Mhm.
So, like in my area, it was like, if you have cramps, you eat yams
Mm.
and not sweet potatoes, yams, which are now hard to find in the
Mhm.
grocery stores. And what is even more confusing, they will call sweet potatoes yams, and they're not, two different families. But yams, if we think about wild yam, the herb, yam, the tuber, has a lot of the same phytochemical and phytohormonal activity, and people were so smart. We grew yams in our garden and we ate them. We,
Mhm.
stored them and ate them over the winter. And then suddenly you just couldn't get them anymore,
Mm.
because they're not really sweet, is the other thing. Sweet potatoes are like now have been bred to be super, super sweet. Yams are not bitter by any means, but they're not this sweet, sweet we've come to expect from something tuberous and yellow. Um, you know, so they just fell out of fashion. So anytime I can find them, I'm like, I'm getting these yams.
Yeah.
Right.
Put them in the cellar or somewhere, keep
Yeah,
them
yeah,
for a while
yeah,
if you can.
I have a cold back room. I keep them in the back room.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So someone who grew up around herbalism and by all means probably had so much at their fingertips and so much knowledge just growing up, what sparked an interest in you to seek advanced education, and what route did you go as far as like your degree?
Well, the world changed. The world changed and medicine changed. So in Tommy Bass's time, my grandmother's time, medicine, the access to medical care was not widespread. And people didn't have insurance. Now almost everybody has some kind of insurance, or can choose to find insurance if they're willing to pay for it. It's out there. You can choose to get it or choose not to get it, but there's something out there. And also during that time period, as opposed to now, it is a situation where pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies influence slash control medicine to great extents. So you have all these drugs suddenly from my grandmother Tommy Bass's time period, all these drugs that people are taking that may be helpful, not saying they're not helpful. Thank goodness for antibiotics, because it kind of shifted infection being the number one killer down to way down the list. So some of these things we need, I'm not knocking that for sure, but my average client now is on 3 to 6 medications,
Oh,
right? It is just really common. So I needed to know about these things. Are these symptoms, signs that are being presented to me by my client, are they side effects of the drugs? Are they part of their pattern of dysfunction from the original disorder? Or are they something new that is happening to them? So how do you discern all that? And so you have to have this information to be able to do that. So I wanted to see what that other side was like. And so I could integrate, and I consider myself an integrative folk herbalist, if there's such a thing. I wanted to be able to integrate that knowledge with knowledge of plants and knowledge of nutrition and eating, and to help serve the people that come to see me, and myself and my family. So it's just I needed to know that. And so along the way, I worked in medical clinics as herbalist slash nutritionist in family health care in Birmingham at a clinic. I'm taught at one point some classes at the University of Alabama, and they're kind of as an adjunct, kind of bringing kind of how do we integrate, and so I wanted to know that, and I wanted to see how a medical office worked. I wanted to see that. I'm just naturally nosy and curious, and I wanted to know. And so it was really eye-opening to me working in a medical clinic with all the limitations and regulations that bind physicians to be able to do what they do. They're really kind of like in a box. So that was eye-opening. between the AMA and the pharmaceutical companies and their own liability insurance they have to have, they're in this box of time. And I am happy to see that some physicians are stepping outside this box, at least in my area. While I run across physicians who are getting even smaller, and the box is really tight around them, even though they're kind of young and there's still their rigidity there. And then I see physicians who've kind of like figured out ways to expand their box and still stay legal in what they have to do. So physicians are legally bound to do a certain thing, and I wanted to know about it. So it was eye-opening working in a medical clinic to see that. So that sent me down to getting my master's degree in health studies.
In health studies.
Mhm.
So, because you have the American Institute of Naturopathy is your online school. And so, even though you grew up around herbalism, obviously you saw the importance of bringing in these other aspects, but nutrition, you talk about, whether it's devices these days. I mean, there's so much out there, other nutritional supplements.
Yes. And there is a lot of different modalities that people can go to, and they're much more widespread and they're much more accepted than they were 20 years ago. There has been a great opening. But at the base of almost every single one of these, there is still a 100 or 200-year-old origin of how that started, like light therapy. They were using that in the early 1900s. Um, you know, as soon as there was electricity, there was light therapy. Somebody had already figured out the different colors of light and how to use them. And then in the kind of pre-World War II, it was like AMA is like, no, you can't do that. It's not proven. So we're not even going to try to prove it because it's not a pharmaceutical, right? And so this is kind of like where medicine had been wide open, kind of like right after the kind of not the invention of electricity, but electricity being, you know, able to be worldwide, that cities could have electricity. And so this this new way to light your dark came about, new way to research came about, machines came about based on electricity. So the advent of electricity kind of like blew open medical investigation for a while, and people were really looking at all kinds of different ways to help the body be better. But then it was like, no, you got to prove it. No, it's not a drug. And so the investigation got closed off, and now it's opening up again. So I'm really hopeful that all the, there'll be more investigation into like light therapy or color therapy, as some people call it, electricity to help the body work better because we are electrical beings. Better information dissemination about food and how nutrients work in the body. One of the things that I see in nutrition, information all over the internet is kind of like the rigidity of, oh, this is the way you have to eat to be healthy. No, this is the way you have to eat to be healthy. No, this is the way you have to eat to be healthy, without taking the individual and their situation into account. All right. So we need to always keep in mind that everybody is different. We all have different genetics. We all have different upbringings. We all have different beliefs. We all have different cultures, and we all have different life experiences and health issues. And we have to take all of that into account.
Or someone's chiming in on Facebook confirming color and light therapies are highly effective. Yeah. Well, even just sometimes you just crave sunshine. I know living in Minnesota in the northern, northern hemisphere, well, the northern latitudes, there are just times you're just like, oh, I need some sunshine.
Yeah, and we do. and we
Yeah.
do. And when I go visit, I have an acupuncturist that I go see on occasion, and they put orange light on my feet while I'm
Mm.
getting my acupuncture, and it is amazing. It warms my whole body up.
Hmm.
I feel warm all over. It gets my lymph moving. It starts healing processes. So I'm a big believer in color and light therapy.
So, how do you think you came back around to the traditional ways of traditional methods? So, what I'm saying is, you're saying when you started learning herbalism from your family, it was just looking at patterns, right?
Yes,
And not necessarily even knowing body parts and so forth. But then you went to formal education and learned all the technicalities of things.
right.
And what do you think kept you from going just full on uh, medical
Medical.
route? Yeah, and but coming around and reintegrating what you learned as a
Yeah.
child.
I think it was when I worked at a mental health center. And keep in mind that I've always picked or tried to get jobs that furthered my education in some way. So I worked at a mental health center for 2 years. And I was the pharmacist assistant. I was in charge of the indigent drug program. I did walk-ins, people just walking in, going, I need help. I did that. I did various groups. So I had a lot of varied experience. And what I saw was that the drugs never worked in the mental health center.
And by worked, what do you mean by
I
worked?
worked. That's good. I need to explain that. People would come in like stiff like boards because they had tardive dyskinesia, because they had so many side effects. Any psychotropic drug is changing neurotransmitter activity. That's how they work.
Mhm.
They're all some neurotransmitter is being affected. And this then changes mood. Now, and I'm not saying that sometimes when somebody is like total going postal psychotic, they don't need these drugs. Obviously, they do, right? But for the average person who is coming to the mental health center and going, I'm feeling depressed because this is going on in my family,
Mhm.
you know, over the long haul, didn't change them. It actually took away their energy, took away their drive, and took away their motivation. And they just became like blah. Maybe they weren't feeling depressed anymore, but they also were lacking motivation. And then they would come back and say, I just don't feel like doing anything since I've been on this medicine. But by then it's been 6 months, and you can't just take a person off that. They have to be slowly weaned. So it was like, why aren't we teaching nutrition? Why aren't we teaching life skills here at the mental health center? Why can't we teach life skills why can't we teach how to create boundaries? Why can't we teach how to step back, how our active listening? Why can't we teach these other modalities that help people instead of just going, here's the drug?
Mhm.
And then people get stuck for years and years and years.
So sounds like it was a really eye-opening experience.
Very eye-opening. At the medical clinic, someone might be on, and this was kind of like pre-statin days, I'll have to say, pre-statin day. But there was still at this time period, let's, like the doctor would send to me and I would like, let's talk about your diet and see if we can improve it. I'm working from a nutritional point of view under the doctor's guidance. I'm not a registered dietitian, but we'll check this out with the doctor. What do you think? Right? And the doctor would come in and would go over everything. There was still some teaching of life skills, because truly what I found is most doctors want their patients to be healthy. They really
Mhm.
do, you
Mhm.
know? And so being on drugs continually may or may not help. But if you could get the person's lifestyle changes in place, that's definitely going to help. They may still need medication, but they may not need as much, right?
Mhm.
So as like, I wasn't seeing this at the mental health center, you know, it was state funded, limited money. Let's get a diagnosis and get them on a medication.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was very eye-opening.
Esther says, "Bravo, Phyllis. I've been wondering about this for years."
Yes.
You know, it's nice to hear from someone's experience, which is why I'm doing this series as well, is, you know, there are commonalities, but then there's those aha stories like, wow. Another question that comes to mind, and respectfully, I'd like to ask, how long have you, since you're, this is kind of hinting at how old are you, but but if you started practicing in your early 20s, um, how long have you been practicing, and what is the major change you've seen from early ailments that people would come in with to now?
Well, if we go to like, all right, so basically I've been practicing because I'm 69, so I've been practicing since I was 21. You can do the math, right? I'm not embarrassed about how old I am. So it has allowed me to accrue a lot of experiences and information, right? Um, and I don't think I look bad for 69.
You look great. Yeah.
So my practice has changed, as I said earlier, because more and more people are on multiple medications. And more people are on psychotropic medications for trauma, PTSD, childhood abuse, sexual abuse. That's a huge chunk of people in our society right now. Um, Discrimination that has affected their life from the time they were born, so there's a lot of trauma out in the world. And I live in the South. I see a lot of trauma. I've always seen a lot of trauma. Saw a lot of trauma at the mental health center. So that's kind of a huge thing that's changed in my practice, that I think has changed in a lot of herbalist practice, that it's it's much more. Let me see how to say this. Even though it's always been, herbalism has always been holistic, we are just now on the tip of the iceberg of understanding all the ramifications of how the mind affects the body, and how your thoughts affect your health for good or ill, and how trauma affects health, how trauma affects your heart, how trauma affects your liver, how trauma affects your weight.
Mm.
You know, and in my grandmother's day, you know, somebody might come with a trauma, and my grandmother was kind of old school gruff, and she would say, pull your pants up, tighten your belt, and keep going, or put on your big girl panties. Yeah. You got to make it through this, right? And she might recommend something for sleep, but there wasn't kind of this view that in her, that this emotional trauma changed neurotransmitters, which now change how the body works. So anytime we're in a trauma, anytime we have emotional angst, depression, it's changing our neurotransmitter release and activity. This changes how our organ systems work. Yeah. So now we're really understanding this. So this is a big shift in my practice too.
So you wouldn't, how would you, obviously it's a general question, but how would you address that person differently than your grandmother? And of course, she knew what she knew at the
Oh,
time.
she knew what she knew, and like I say, she was gruff, didn't pull any punches. She raised 11 children. She had 11 children,
Wow.
and she took care of them with an iron hand, so she was like authoritarian, little on the gruff side, but also tenderhearted.
Mm.
There was that aspect too. Um, And what was the question again? I got caught up in my grandmother.
So if you were facing that same imaginary client, how would you address them differently these days?
The trauma client,
Right.
right? So I don't ask people to share their trauma. I just might ask, had they had a trauma in their life? Whether they choose to share that at some point in time, that would be up to them. But just knowing that there could be a trauma, and then I would say, how long ago is that? Then let's correlate that. In my mind, I'm thinking, let's correlate that with, when did your health issues start? And then if it started within 1 to 2 years after the trauma, then I can suspect that this, whatever the trauma was, is still has affected, and it's still affecting to some extent their physical health. And this will include how well the immune system is working, right? Because if we're releasing cortisol continually, our immune system is being suppressed.
I see through my own experience through yoga teacher training, learning herbs, and essentially going through these programs myself as I help these teachers put together their sites and so forth, that you think you're going through as the student, but you realize, oh, I learned a lot about myself through this process.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm wondering, for someone who grew up around it, do you still have that experience too? Like,
Yes. Yeah, I'm learning something new almost every day that helps me. Then I help my clients, or sometimes I learn something new from a client that helps other clients, but also helps me. We don't need to take ourselves out of the equation. We still need to be working on ourselves, learning something all the time. We need to be gathering um, information and learning new things from all our experiences, even TV shows. I watch TV shows, and what did I learn from that TV show? What was that writer trying to convey? That then I might kind of think about how to do this with myself and my clients. I watched a documentary yesterday. It was on John Baptiste, an amazing composer and super musician. And it was a documentary of his journey from New Orleans up to writing the American Sympathy. No, Sympathy. No, I've got
symphony.
Symphony. Thank you. And but at the same time, he's having winning Grammys, all this amazing stuff is going on in his life. His wife has cancer,
Mm.
and it's not great odds, and she has to have a bone marrow, and she's creative, she's a writer, and it's overwhelming to them both, and they both have faith, and they both are creative, um, and they're just trying to make it through. And at one point he was feeling really depressed, talking to a friend, and the friend said, this is you're on this train ride, but it's the train ride you chose.
Mm.
And I was like, that's it. That was an aha moment for me. It was like, we are all on the train that we picked at some point in life. Do we get off the train? Do we want to get off the train? How do we make the ride better? So it just started my mind going in all these different directions of, how can I make my train ride better? I want the luxury train ride. I want good food on my train ride. I want the nice sleeping quarters on my train ride. How do I do this? Do I need to get off? What part of my train do I need to get off of my journey, where it's like, now it's too much or overwhelming? Do I need to let that go? Or how can I change that? So just that little thing like that, I'm always learning something every day, whether it's from a song, a book, something a friend says, something I read on the internet. I got to keep going.
That's a perfect segue to another question I have, which is, especially when you have kids to support and you're working multiple jobs, what kept you going on the herbal route? Like what kept you, yeah, just what kept you going?
every time I thought about quitting, God would do something to make me stay. I'm
Really?
serious.
Really?
Serious, serious, every single time. I think, well, I'm not making any money here. Gosh, I need to get a job at the local factory. I mean, I thought that more than once when I had like 4 little kids going through a bad divorce, trying to support them. Um, and almost every single time, something really super and unique would happen. Like one time I was in the grocery store early, and I'm just walking around dressed awful. I mean, I got on a pair of short shorts and a t-shirt and a pair of flip-flops, but this was, what I could afford at the time. And there was this woman in there in this long dress with a little cap on her head, kind of dressed like an Amish or a
Mm.
Mennonite, which we have in our area. And I was just walking around looking at stuff, putting it back, had a few things in my cart, checked out, got home, and and she pulled up in the driveway behind me. She had followed me home. She had followed me home. And I walked over to her car and I said, "Can I help you?" And she held out her hand and I took her hand. I thought she was going to shake my hand. She put a wad of cash in my hand and she said, "God told me to tell you you're doing good work."
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. And those were her exact words. And there was enough money to pay all my utility bills and buy groceries for a month in that hand. And I was like, okay. And in the next 2, 3 days, I had clients knocking on the door where I'd been about to give up. Here it was. So, and I've just
Wow.
had many experiences like that in my life.
Mm. I'm tempted to ask for more, but like that's such a good one. It's like, you know, maybe for another time. That's amazing. That's wonderful. That actually you keep like reading my mind, like what my next question is. And the next one was amazing stories. Literally, that was my next question. Um, maybe I would imagine also it's inspiring to see the people that are helped. Maybe that do you have a few stories that come to mind?
Well, yes. And I will say, as an herbalist, if you help somebody, you may never see them again.
Mm,
So you may never know how if you help them or not. Truly, if what you've recommended, they go away, they do it, they don't come back.
mm,
So I do have one recently that happened, and so I had somebody find me on Facebook, send me a message, and said, "You may not remember me, but 20 years ago at the medical clinic, this was the clinic in Birmingham I worked at." She said, after years of doctors not being able to help me, she said, "Within a week, you had me back to normal." And I have been normal up until about a month ago. And I'm like, wow, whatever was going on with her. And so I never saw her again. So I didn't know I'd helped her. Right. So
mhm,
I just want to point that out to folks. You may not always know the positive results. People are like, um, so there have been like many stories like that, not necessarily like I gave him something and 3 minutes later they were all better. Not that, but that they took what I'd recommended, they went away, they implemented, they did the hard work. And this is something I want to point out. Being healthy is not easy. you know,
mhm,
it's not always easy. There's some work to that. Whether we're growing our own food or we're searching out good foods to eat, or whether we're just paying attention to our body and trying to do as a healthy a lifestyle approach as we can, it can be hard work. And if you're sick and trying to get better, you have to focus on yourself and pay attention to things and do that. And then your family are like, all you think about is yourself. You're being narcissistic. Well, that person is sick. This is what they need to do right now.
mhm.
This is absolutely what they need to do right now. and they may not be as giving or as open to their family and friends, but when they get better, they will be again. So, folks, slack off on the sick people in your family and give them a chance to get better, and be supportive rather than um, missing their energy and saying something about that. Be more supportive. It'll make their journey shorter and less stressful. So it's hard work to stay healthy. It's hard work to be sick and get healthy, and it takes time. Occasionally, there can be a kind of like this miracle, immediate thing that happens, but I haven't seen that too much in my life. What I've seen is people doing the work. And when you do the work, it creates long-term changes.
Hmm. If you had a magic wand and you could have everybody doing some basic habits, what would be your wish list for their health?
For their
What?
health,
Yeah.
um, drink enough water, eat nutritionally dense, low-calorie foods. 2 things right at the top of the list is all lifestyle. Don't smoke, don't drink, don't do recreational drugs, and wear a condom when you go out prowling around because STDs are no fun. I'm gonna throw that in there. And because I feel like there are these new drugs that kinda help, people are not as cautious as they might have been in the past. Um, also, make boundaries.
Mm.
Don't get overexhausted. Create the boundaries that help you be healthy, that help your family be healthy. Um, decide where you want to be on the train and what kind of journey you want that train to be and where you need to get off that train. I think that's important. Herbs as needed. Herbs, I think, are occasionally preventive, but I think they're better at helping a person get healthy and then maintaining once
Mhm.
they're healthy. Yeah. So those would be my top things. Hey, wear your seatbelt. You know, there are some just really kind of common things we should all be doing to lower our risk factors. Big one, exercise, exercise, exercise. Move, move, move. You got to. We heal to some extent when we move. We have to move our lymph. And it's in my actually movement and exercise is in my top three.
Mhm. It was one of the first classes we created at your institute.
Yes.
Because I like exercise, but I realize it's not everybody's thing, and so part of it was you're helping people to find their thing, right? And just simply
Right.
walking,
Just walking.
how just simply walking is so healthy and beneficial.
How about just cleaning your house?
Yeah,
I
double
I
win.
yeah, double win. And you can move a good 5,000 steps just cleaning your house.
Now I'm not going to get all the data right on this, but people could look up the references. So I was listening to, I believe it was an Andrew Huberman Lab podcast, and he's a neuroscientist and professor at Stanford, and he was talking about how I believe how EMDR was therapy was created, and the eye movement therapies, and apparently. I may not remember this exactly, but it's along these lines. So the therapists found that they would take their patients out for walks, and they were healing their emotional issues a lot faster. And that's how they correlated the eye movement component to it. But they thought, well, you can't always take a patient out for a walk. There's privacy issues, there's mobility issues. And so
Right.
that's how they moved the therapy, and they created it so you could do it in a clinical setting. And I thought to myself, how many times I'm out for a walk, I'm on a trail, and you're naturally kind of watching the things go by, and you're
Yeah.
moving your eyes. And I
Yes.
thought, isn't that's must be nature's therapy, right? I mean, how
That's
much
your
better do you
therapy.
feel? I feel a lot better if I'm out for a walk in nature. And I
Yes.
think we're just meant to like operate this way, like, with
Yes.
nature.
Well, I mean, for how many thousands of years our ancestors lived in nature,
Right.
right? It's really, in the grand scheme of the time we've been on this earth, only a short time we've all lived in buildings and apartments and houses, right?
And we buy appliances to go next to our toilet so that we can properly squat and go to the bathroom. And
Right.
that's, you know, and we're built to garden and squat down and do those things.
Right.
And it's,
And I will say that the hips and squatting, they have correlate if you can squat to how long you might live.
mm,
It is
mhm,
one of those basic primitive movements that we have been geared to do our whole life. And when we don't do one of them, they have correlated that or associated that with a shortened lifespan. And I see that in elderly folks, I see that in clients, is the loss of balance, the lack of mobility because they stopped doing these movements. They were very doing them when they were young and had kids, because you
mhm,
squat down, you pick them up, you put them away, you get the groceries in. But at some point, people just go, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't have to do that anymore. And
mhm.
it's not part of normal daily activities. And so you lose that muscle strength, you lose that muscle tone. I try squatting every day. I try lifting every day. And so we just do, I think there's 7 primitive basic movements. Y'all look them up. If we can just do those, our bodies will stay super strong. We'll keep building bone along the spine. Osteoporosis used to be considered the disease of the elderly. Now it's in 20 and 30-year-olds.
Wow.
Yeah, the big study came out last week about that. It's not for old people anymore. And it used to be mostly women. Now it's young men and women.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is. Not moving, sitting in front of the games.
We're working on the computer. I mean, so much work
Yeah,
is you really do have to make an effort. I can attest to
you
that.
do. You do have to make an effort. Yes.
That reminds me, and maybe on a closing note, because we're getting off into good conversation now too.
Yeah.
There's the documentary about the blue zones.
Yes.
They made a video about it, or a movie about it, and you see all these. So it's about people who live to over 100, right? The centenarians around the world, and what are the commonalities? And in so many of the locations, they show that they, they're eating the good food, like you're mentioning, and the movement. Those were a couple of the main factors, and their
Yes.
social life. And you
Yeah.
see in a number of them, they actually live in mountains, and they're just like they're 90 some years old or 100 years old, because that's the study, right? And they're climbing hillsides like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And it would make most, I mean, I get concerned about my grandmother, for example, going up a few steps, but they're literally going up the like old,
Yes.
cobblestones and pathways like this.
And they may be going up slow. Their
Mhm.
pace may have slowed down over the years, but they're still going.
Yep,
Yeah, keeping
exactly.
that heart healthy, keeping it moving, working all these muscles, and they're moving against gravity.
Yes. Fun stuff. We can go off on so
Yes,
many tangents. We'll have to
we
save that for next
could. We
time.
we absolutely could.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I knew a number of these things, but there's a lot that I didn't know about you, and what is the journey to becoming an herbalist. And I think we're going to find out there are many ways, but there are some commonalities. And thank you very much for sharing. We
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you for having me, and bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.